Hi folks, it's Matt here from the Ask the Arb podcast. Today we've got another one of our guest series and I am delighted to welcome Chris on. Chris, full disclaimer here, Chris has actually used our services, so I won't ask him about that just in case he's too brutally honest. I'm not prepared to take that at this time on I think it's a Tuesday morning. So Chris is the director of Aspect Living, and Aspect Living are a property development company based in London. Is that a fair description, Chris?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
Good stuff. And so, Chris, I like to start these podcasts by finding out a little bit about people's background and how you have ended up in the property development business. So, how did you get to where you are now? What kind of drove you to follow this as a career choice?
Okay, so full disclaimer here. My day job is actually in finance, which I still hold down, whilst I do development, property management, so on and so forth on the side. I guess I made an active decision when I left university that I wanted to get into property. I jumped into the deep end quite quickly. I went straight into HMOs. I managed to get quite a large Victorian sort of 3-bed house. I converted that to a 5-bed HMO. It was a non-Article 4 area at the time. For those of you who don't know, Article 4 is effectively a directive that councils can introduce, which stops a permitted development right. That can be converting houses to HMOs. It can be office to residential conversions, so on and so forth. I kind of then scaled up from the first HMO, did a few back to brick HMO conversions again, sort of full ensuite, very high spec. And I was looking for another HMO. They kept on falling through for one reason or another. I had a few agents who approached me about sort of other sort of opportunities, either HMO conversions or development, sites with development potential. Again, they kept on falling through. I think I went for about 12 deals or so, where I actually went through conveyancing, paid out quite a bit of money, went through the whole sort of either bridging or lending process. And eventually managed to find sort of my first site, which was a detached house, which I submitted planning for 2 semis. Which was actually approved fairly quickly. From then on, it's kind of been a bit downhill, actually. That was sort of my background. About 6 years in property or so, sort of going from HMOs through to conversions and ground up developments. Yeah,
and you've mentioned a few really interesting things there, so particularly in relation to financing these kind of property deals, and I'm guessing your background in finance has made that easier, has it?
No, not particularly. No, so sorry, I've got lots of little things in the background. I guess I'm a business analyst. I work for a bank. I've always been self-employed, I was a contractor. Because I earned a daily rate, I guess it made it slightly easier than I guess peers who had day jobs to get mortgages. Typically, at least at the time, your affordability was calculated on whatever you earn per day, times 5 days a week, times 48 weeks a year, times about 4.5 to 5 times, which gave you the net, or rather the gross amount that you could borrow. So that's how I went about it. But no, I think in hindsight, I would have probably listened to a lot more other peers who were doing what I wanted to do. At the time, I think I lost out on a lot of opportunities by not doing that. I just sort of decided to learn this stuff myself. I'm quite hard-headed. It's worked out, for the better, I guess. So I'm in an all right position. But I definitely could have excelled the sort of ground-up development process by understanding, what and how other people were doing and funding deals.
It's a challenge though, isn't it? Because it's not some. I suppose in some ways it's a bit of a black art. It's quite a dry subject as well, and there seems to be two types of advice out there for people that are looking to develop property and get into property. You've got one side of it, which is I'll sell you a course on Facebook and tell you how you're going to rule the world and become a millionaire in 10 days. And then the other side of it tends to be, I guess, industry magazines, industry articles, industry background, and you tend to often wonder what the objectives are of those particular people. Have you stumbled across those kind of two avenues before?
Yeah, I think the property course, sort of selling programs for sort of lots of money is quite prevalent, and I know a lot of people who have spent quite a bit of money on those courses. For the most part, with the sort of advent of internet, and social media, most knowledge is free. Knowledge is a cheap commodity, for lack of a better word. You don't need to spend money on courses. There are numerous people doing sort of podcasts like yourself, who are sharing their sort of journeys on Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn, so on and so forth. And it's very easy to reach out to these people and sort of like glean, what they're doing. I personally found that social media has been sort of a great avenue in terms of meeting people who are doing similar things. Expanding your network across all sort of practices, architects, brokers, builders, so on and so forth. And I don't have a building background, but I've got friends who are just following me on Instagram, who are bricklayers, and they're sort of like telling me sort of like substitute, London stock yellows for something else, make a huge saving. These aren't things that you would know off the bat.
Yes.
But most people, for the most part, are generally quite helpful, and they're willing to sort of, offer their opinions. It's obviously up to you in terms of whether you decide to listen to them or not. But
yeah, absolutely. Well, they say, don't they? You're the sum of the 10 people you spend the most time with. So if you can surround yourself with really, really useful individuals that are, I tend to find, further on in the journey than perhaps you are yourself, then they've already made those hideously expensive mistakes. And coming on to hideously expensive mistakes, before we get on to perhaps where things haven't gone the way that you might want them to, what would you say are kind of your top 3 frustrations with the planning process as it sits at the moment, trying to get some of these schemes approved?
So I'm probably fairly uniquely placed where I am. I'm a first-time developer. I find that property is an incredibly capital-intensive industry. And most people who are first-time developers or sort of relatively young, if I can call myself young, probably don't have the experience or capital to get into it. Most of my schemes, if not all of them, are actually in the borough of Croydon. Croydon has declared bankruptcy, I think 3 times in the past 2 years or so. So they have a more acute funding crisis, opposed to what the general consensus might be nationally. So I think probably those two sort of issues alone probably give me a bit more of a unique and tailored perspective. But I guess overall, it's probably. I think recently there's been a general sort of consensus amongst residents that they want to oppose developments regardless of where or what they are. NIMBYism isn't really a construct that exists as much in the suburbs or large cities as opposed to places with sort of large swathes of countryside. But Croydon had an abundance of approvals, which were 9-flatted developments on single plots, which residents absolutely hated. They had a policy, which was SPP2, which for the most part was developers' charter. It was a tick list exercise that said, if the neighbouring dwellings are detached houses, you can build 4 stories. You can have parking at a ratio of 0.5 to 1 if you're in a certain PTAL location, PTAL being a sort of transport, what's the word? Viability or effectiveness within an area. But that sort of overall policy resulted in my opinion, certain developments that maybe weren't suited to the character of the area, and probably enhanced and frustrated residents' opinions even more. I've seen, sort of small developments, like 6, 7 flats or so, which have garnered sort of 600 or so objections. And it's just because, the residents just don't want anything, additionally there. I've tried to combat that by going for mostly housing developments, and I still find that residents oppose them massively. I mean, if you're building sort of detached houses opposite someone's, house on a background site, it doesn't really impact them. I don't necessarily think you can use the argument that my house value will decrease. Detached houses probably increase your house value. Don't quote me on that, but but yeah. So yeah, it's the residents' views, the I guess lack of resource available to planning departments in an already constrained environment, and I guess the cost involved for the number of surveys and consultants that you're expected to engage at pre-app and before you submit a full application. It racks up quite a bit, and given there's no guarantee that you'll get a decision, arguably, a lot of the sort of reports that you get could probably be conditioned. I
was just going to ask you that exact question. Do you feel that some of this stuff can be conditioned? I mean, there are things that can't be, and do you often? I think sometimes that. Particularly with pre-app, the planning officer that you deal with can sometimes be quite junior, and a lot of the responses can be very copy and paste, and you do wonder what the value is in that pre-app process. How have you found that at Croydon?
Yeah, so I think that's a fair comment. I, in retrospect, wouldn't have gone for pre-apps. I don't really think that they serve much purpose for less contentious developments. I understand the need if you're building a 5-story high-rise building, or something that's maybe slightly more contemporary in a sort of traditional sort of setting. But I have, for of the 5 or 6 pre-apps I've done, I haven't received a written response for about 3 of them, for one. Wow. So that's it's not much wasted, but I don't have any I can rely on. Policy changes continuously as well, so you can't rely on your pre-app feedback as gospel. I've had planners renege on what they've said in pre-app on several applications. So I personally don't necessarily know that there's much benefit. I understand that if you go to appeal, the planning inspector likes to see that you've at least you've entertained the council in terms of sort of going back and forth, understanding their views to try and tailor the development to what the council deem acceptable. But given the length of time that takes, and especially if you operate, having options, I don't know that it's feasible. I seldom, I don't know many developers who have options for longer than 18 months.
I was just going to ask that question. Is that fairly common that people start to get frustrated and withdraw those options after that kind of time period? Because I mean, really, you need a good couple of years, don't you? 2 to 3 years, really, I guess, to be confident that you're going to get all your ducks in a row on that.
Exactly, and the risk is that your option lapses or expires if it's not an open-ended option. The vendor says, actually, I want more, and you're faced with either being held metaphorically to gunpoint by a vendor who wants more for a site that you gained planning for, or the developer just says, you know what, it's not worth my time, I'm going to pull the app. The government is out on housing. Someone spent however much in redundant costs, and no one wins. No, it's not good. And I guess it's worth pointing out, I mean, within our own company we operate nationwide, and I'd like to say that what you're saying to me is the first time I've heard
frustrations with local planning authorities, but it's not. But I think, do you have any sympathy for them and their position? Because I tend to find that these officers are overworked, underpaid, have ridiculous workloads. Or do you think? I think it's from my own perspective, I think it's a two-stage thing. I think some of them could help themselves by making a bit more pragmatic decisions. But then I guess when every decision you make is in the public domain, the pressure they must be under is incredible. I guess what I'm saying is we possibly need to look at the planning system as a whole, don't we? And how we can perhaps revamp this and make it a little bit more streamlined. It's hard not to throw mud, though. I try not to throw mud at local planning authorities, but I find myself doing it more and more because it's so frustrating.
That's fair. I mean, that's probably a wider conversation.
Yes.
Large people sort of in the public sector are probably underpaid. And it's true. If you are underpaid, under-resourced, and the private sector are offering more glamorous jobs, higher pay, so on and so forth, for the most part, you probably end up with a workforce that isn't necessarily the most motivated, or aren't necessarily the best placed to make decisions relating to planning. I mean, particularly frustrating is the changes internally in planning departments. I've had different planning officers on 2 different pre-apps, and then I've had a different planning officer for full submission. Given a pre-app is an opinion, it doesn't really make sense to change that because you're forever moving the goalposts. So no, I do empathise and sympathise with them, but in the same breath, in the private sector, we face the same issues. We're all resource constrained, and the difference is we probably have less grace in terms of errors, timeframes, so on and so forth, and we're also held accountable by public bodies or regulators as well.
Absolutely. And are you finding that those timeframes to get a decision are getting drawn out into infinity and beyond, to steal a phrase?
I'm probably fairly lucky. So I started development possibly at the worst possible time, which was immediately after the pandemic started. So had a period of maybe 2 years or so where applications were taking 6 months to be validated, and then an additional sort of 12 months to be determined or so. So you were spending sort of 12 months or so just for a decision on you for that, let alone pre-app, so and so. Whereas now we've kind of come out of the pandemic and we're starting to sort of normalise in terms of work-life balance and workloads. I actually think that we're moving in the right direction. So the past few applications I've had have been several times faster than the first applications that were determined. We're still some way off the statutory guidelines, 8 weeks or 13 weeks, but we're definitely trending in the right direction, in my opinion.
That's good. Yeah, no, that's good to hear. And I mean, outside of the actual planning consent side of things, what's your biggest frustration in that space at the moment? Is it finding good tradespeople? Is it instructing people to do surveys, architecture? Is there one thing that sticks out and you think, oh no, I've got to engage the services of an ecologist? That's going to be a pain.
I don't know where I start here. I've got several problems. I'm struggling to find reliable tradespeople who are reasonably priced. Everyone who's good is either booked up for years ahead, or alternatively they want a premium because they're so good. I also have a problem of finance as well. So given the base rate or swap rate increases of late, financing is becoming a lot more challenging. So we've got increasing costs, which have probably increased, I don't know, maybe 30% on 2 years ago or so. We're faced with increased finance costs. And then we've got landowners and vendors who also want a premium for their sites. Those three factors, sort of collectively make a lot of schemes unviable unless you are a contracted developer. The difficulty with developers is that a lot of developers are, for the most part, middlemen. We don't necessarily do anything. We're just project managers. We find sites, we find, we engage architects, we engage all the planners, consultants, we engage a contractor and just piece it all together. But we don't actually do anything. However, you do have a few contractor developers who are able to build at cost. They know what they're doing. They can purchase a site, maybe with a premium or so, and they can build a lot more competitively than the developers who do things from A to Z.
Yes.
So I think I'm starting to see that change as well. Land values are decreasing because people aren't paying the premiums that maybe they once could get 2-3 years ago. But only time will tell.
I mean, we're starting to see we do some work. We do bits and bobs for national house builders, but some fairly sizable local house builders on sort of 30-40 unit schemes, and we are starting to see quite a few of those projects being pulled now because they're not viable. They were selling stuff off plan, ready to go, pretty much, and now they're scaling back the phases of these developments. So they're only perhaps building 2 or 3 units, trying to sell those, and then moving on. Sites that we were instructed to start work on, in some cases, has been pulled now. Whether they're actually starting to see the financial impacts within their own businesses or whether they're reacting to hype and media, I don't know. But certainly there was a real sudden and complete lack of confidence. I think it probably started, I'm going to say, early December last year in developers. And it's a bit of a mess out there at the moment. That coupled with rising costs and a lack of tradespeople, as you identify, and that when you say tradespeople or builders, people automatically think you're looking for somebody to do first fit electrics on a house or build a house. Well, it could just be that you just need them to come and change a consumer unit or swap out a toilet or something. And trying to find anybody to do jobs like that at the moment is incredible, which seems conversely it's just not joined up. If the economy is contracting, why have we got no trades? Oh, with some microphone falling around. Why have we got no tradespeople to do work? I mean, have you got a view on that?
So I'm very much in favour or an advocate of doing apprenticeships rather than sort of white collar sort of work. I think we have a lot of money can be made doing trades. I think they're useful skills to have, which genuinely carry a society or economy forward. So I think, again, of late, the past few years, there's been a concerted effort by government and others to try to get young sort of generations after school to go into more technical roles. A prime example is Rishi Sunak mandating that all 16 to 18 year olds have to do mathematics until A level. That's fine. I'm again very strong advocate of maths. I think it's one of the most useful skills you can have, but I also acknowledge that not everyone suits that sort of career path. Maybe some people should become bricklayers or electricians or plumbers. We need them, not only for building Britain, but for maintaining your own house. If something goes wrong, you need a consumer unit changed, or to rewire your house or fit, I don't know, a heat pump. You rely on these people, and we don't have enough of them. I can't comment on, I guess, the financial incentives for doing that. I know that there are some programs actively encouraging people to sort of take up greener initiatives in terms of installing ground source, air source heat pumps, solar panels, so on and so forth. But I don't know that a lot of this stuff is sustainable, both in terms of carbon footprint that it generates, training required, and for the most part the notional cost of doing so.
It's a yeah. There are some huge challenges out there facing us as a country at the moment, and as an individual, I tend to be very positive about these things. I don't watch the news or listen to the news or anything like that, because I find that has a negative it influences my decisions with my own business, which I guess kind of feeds me through as we approach sort of half an hour of taking up your time. That we have a kind of a closing final question that I like to ask people, particularly people who are entrepreneurs and running their own business. Have you got a favourite tool or productivity hack that you use within your own business that perhaps other people might not be aware of?
That's a great question. One that I've surprisingly never been asked. Specifically from a development perspective, developers require land. Without land, you have to develop. Someone told me ages ago how a lot of developers, find sites. They'll be driving around and they'll see a site that's maybe a rundown house or small house on a large plot of land. They'll pull over and they'll just knock on the door, and that has been the most life-changing bit of advice I've ever received.
Wow.
To date, I have a very, very high conversion rate in terms of options that I get. Every option I've got has just been from me door knocking. More often than not, I get a lot of messages via LinkedIn, Instagram, so on and so forth, going, how are you finding all these options? And I say this to people because everyone else in the market is just sending letters. If you've seen a site, it means that 10, 20, 30, 40 other people have seen that site too. And that vendor probably has about 30 letters or so. The only way to really distinguish yourself is to go out, door knock, and build a rapport. Worst case, the person says no, or they're not in. In terms of actually operating and having a pipeline to develop, going out there, door knocking, and not being afraid has definitely been the most life-changing bit of advice.
Brilliant. But I've found I'm considerably older than you, I fear, and I have discovered over the years that, certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, and employing quite young graduates within my own business as well on occasions, that those human-to-human contact skills are lacking, they're dwindling. People are afraid to actually pick up the phone and speak to somebody, let alone speak to someone face to face. They want to send a text, they want to send an email, and quite often just picking up the phone and speaking to somebody can solve a lot of problems extremely quickly. I mean, the lack of tonality in email and text communication, I can't even begin to think how many problems that causes nationwide. So knock on the door, speak to people. That's a brilliant one. You'll possibly wish you hadn't put that out there now. This is going to be a flurry of door knocking around the Croydon area. So oh dear. Chris, thank you for your time. It's really, really useful to get a developer on here, to get developer perspective. So, folks, what I would say is, if you've got any questions, I'm sure Chris would welcome you reaching out to him. Chris, how can people get in contact with you?
So Instagram's probably the best one. If you give a follow to Aspect Living, you can follow me on LinkedIn. Or any general emails, info@aspectliving.co.uk.
Perfect. I will stick all that in the description. And thanks for coming along. And I will speak to you soon.
Pleasure. Bye.
That was Chris Lesflores from Aspect Design. It was interesting to hear Chris's journey from the finance world to property development. In particular, the challenges around interaction with local planning authorities, and in particular, his thoughts around the value of pre-app advice. Look, we know local authorities are cash-strapped, and nobody wants to bash people who are doing their best under difficult circumstances. But it's clear, isn't it, really, that change is required. To reach Chris and maybe find out some more about obtaining options to purchase and his unique perspective, but actually pretty obvious approach to building relationships with people, find him on Instagram at Aspect Living and follow the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening. I'm Matt Harmsworth and you have been listening to the Ask the Arb podcast.